It started the night my upstairs neighbor came back. At least, that's what I thought. I moved into this building last year, a small two-story complex near downtown, mostly quiet, mostly older tenants. The guy above me was named Eric. We barely spoke except for a few hellos in the hallway, but I knew his schedule by sound alone. He worked nights, left around 8 p.m., returned around 4 a.m. His steps overhead became part of my routine background noise. Until one week in August, everything went silent. No footsteps, no creaks from the floorboards. Nothing. I figured he was on vacation until about 10 days later when I woke up to heavy thuds coming from his apartment around 2 a.m. At first, relief washed over me. He was back. But then the noise pattern didn't make sense. There was no pacing, no TV hum, no water running, just one repeated sound every few minutes, like furniture being dragged short distances, followed by something soft hitting the floor. Then silence again. It went on for almost an hour. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened my front door quietly and craned my neck up the stairwell. The hallway above was dark except for a faint light coming from under his door. I was about to go back inside when the dragging started again, this time closer, right above the spot where I stood. That was enough for me. I went back in, locked up, and put in earbuds. The next morning, I caught the landlord in the parking lot. When I mentioned Eric's late-night noise, she frowned. "Eric moved out last month," she said. The words didn't register at first. "Moved out?" I repeated. She nodded. "He broke the lease early, left his keys in the Dropbox. No one's rented that unit since." That night, I stayed up listening. Nothing. Then, around 3:17 a.m., a single knock echoed from above, like something hitting the floor once, hard. The kind of sound you feel in your chest more than hear. After that, no more noises. But the next morning, there were wet streaks running down my ceiling, thin lines that looked too dark to be water. Maintenance said they'd check it, but when I got home from work, the streaks were gone, painted over. No one had entered my apartment that day. Over the next week, small things kept happening. My smoke alarm beeped at random times. The ceiling fan turned on by itself once. And every morning around 3, my cat would sit under the same corner of the room and stare straight up, ears flat, tail twitching, like she heard something I couldn't. Last Friday, I finally decided to go upstairs. I waited until early evening when the hallway lights came on. The air felt stale, like the place hadn't been opened in months. I knocked once, twice, no answer. When I tried the handle, it turned easily. The door wasn't even locked. Inside, everything was spotless except for the living room carpet. There was a perfect darker circle in the center of the floor, maybe 2 feet wide, like something heavy had sat there for a long time. I crouched closer and realized the carpet fibers were slightly melted, stiff under my fingers. The air smelled faintly metallic. That's when I heard a faint tapping from behind me, not from another room, but from the vent above the doorway. 3 slow taps, then a scraping sound, like nails on metal. I didn't wait to find out what it was. When I told the landlord again, she said she'd send someone to inspect the ventilation system. But 2 days later, all the upstairs units were sealed off with yellow tape. She said it was for maintenance and safety upgrades. No one's been up there since. Now,
Every night around 3:17 a.m., I wake up without knowing why. And for just a second, I hear that same faint scraping coming from the vent above my bed. Only now, it's not from above me. It's inside the walls. If you've ever heard strange noises in your own apartment, tell me in the comments. Maybe you've got the same neighbor I did. And if you think you could sleep through that, think again. When my uncle first invited me up to his fishing cabin for a week of winter work, he described it like a retreat. Miles of white, a frozen lake that felt endless, and nights so quiet they made your ears ring. I thought I knew what quiet meant. I was wrong. The lake sits in a hollow that swallows sound. By day, the ice glitters like glass. By night, it seems to become a lid over something very old. My job was simple: clear snow from the dock and maintain the small generator, so I welcomed the solitude. On the second night, a storm came through and left the world raw and bright. Around midnight, I heard something odd through the wind, distant, rolling, as if someone below the ice had started speaking. At first, it was a pattern of breaths, too regular to be an animal. When I pressed my ear to the cold wooden railing at the end of the dock, syllables threaded through the groan of the boards, whispers that sounded like names or fragments of names, layered and warped. My skin crawled because the tone was intimate, as if someone beneath that glass was describing the exact way I stood with my coat zipped to my chin. I told myself it was a trick of temperature and humidity. Voices carried weird on open water. But in the morning, there was a round hole in the ice I hadn't seen before, ragged and steaming. Around it were marks like something heavy had been pulled away. No tracks extended toward the tree line, only those marks and a faint chalk of iron along the rim.
My uncle shrugged and brewed coffee, moving with a careful normalcy that felt rehearsed. "Lake shifts," he said. "People walk across, the ice changes." When I pressed him, his hands tightened on the mug, and he said, "We don't answer it. You don't go calling." He looked at me the way a man looks at a storm coming in, certain it will pass, but aware of how it will change the land. That night, the cabin radio, the old AM unit he kept beside the sink, came alive while the lights were out. Static filled the kitchen, then a voice that, in the swirl of hiss, sounded like mine. It was faint, cut across by noise, but a phrase stuck: "Under here." The hair on my arms prickled, and the clock over the stove read 12:07. I was the only one awake. I followed my uncle's flashlight toward the dock and saw his beam marching out onto the white plain. At first, I thought he'd gone for help. Then the beam stopped a good distance from shore and tilted down toward the hole. He knelt. I shouted for him to return and heard him call back in a calm voice that did not belong to the man I knew. "Hold the light." He sounded far away, as if his words were pushed through water. On the surface, the temperature shifted, the wind died, and the world leaned in, waiting. Below the ice, the noises changed, no longer voices, but a measured, almost mechanical cadence, like someone tapping rhythms from under the floor of the world. I remember thinking that if the ice broke, it would not be a fall, it would be an unveiling. At dawn, the search teams found nothing. The hole had refrozen smooth. No tracks, no crushed reeds. My uncle's boots were on the porch, his jacket hung by the stove, as if he had never left. But his fishing knife lay open on the dock, its handle still warm. Later, when officers questioned me, they treated my account like a story told to make sense of loss. Good intention, bad facts. The official report used words like accident and misadventure. I left the cabin that day, but the hollow stayed with me.
Years passed. I moved cities, changed jobs, learned how to sleep with the lights dimmed. Still, some nights the air feels as if it might peel away and reveal a brightness underneath. Last winter, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. It was an old recording, static, a thin melody, and beneath that the faintest syllable of my own name, stretched long and quiet. The message ended with a sound like ice settling. I replayed it until the edges of the noise became a map. The voice was not a copy, it was a memory of my voice, the way a photograph remembers a face. It said only one direct thing: we listen for the ones who come back. I haven't been back to the cabin. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I learned not to press my ear to thin wood. But sometimes, when the sky is close and cold and the streetlights hum, in a neighborhood far from any lake, I swear I can hear the ocean of a frozen thing moving, an undercurrent of syllables, patient as tide, calling my name in slow, deliberate rounds. If you ever find yourself on a frozen lake and the ice speaks, don't assume it's wind. Walk back to warmth, take one steady breath, and lock the door. Some things sing to be reminded they still have an audience. Some songs are trying to pull someone back under. If this story gave you chills, like the video and subscribe. Every view helps us dig up more real accounts like this. Comment below, would you follow a voice across the ice or walk away to safety? I drive long-haul freight across the Midwest, mostly night routes. If you've ever driven those stretches between Illinois and Nebraska at 3 a.m., you know the silence isn't really silence. It hums like the air itself is listening. 2 months ago, I picked up a delivery outside St. Louis. The dispatcher warned me about weather up north, so I stuck to Route 54, an older highway with barely any service stops. Around midnight, my radio began picking up static. It happens sometimes, so I didn't think much of it, until the static started shaping into a pattern, a faint rhythm, almost like someone whispering in Morse code. Then a voice. Keep right. Don't stop. It was flat, genderless, mechanical. I assumed it was interference from the GPS unit, but the GPS was off. The radio light flickered, and the voice said it again, slower this time. Keep right. There was no one else on the road. My headlights hit nothing but open asphalt and the faint shimmer of frost. I kept driving. Maybe 5 minutes later, I passed a wreck. A car flipped onto its roof, still steaming. If I'd been in the left lane, I would have hit the debris. I called 911. The dispatcher said a trooper was already en route. I asked, how long ago had the accident been reported? She hesitated. About 30 seconds ago. How did you know? After that night, the voice didn't come back, not until a week later. This time it said, stop at the next station. I laughed to myself, thinking maybe I was getting pranked through the CB band. But 5 miles later, the next station appeared, a rundown fuel stop that didn't exist on my map. Lights buzzing, a single attendant half asleep behind the counter. I filled up, grabbed coffee,
paid cash, and drove off. When I checked my GPS later, there was no record of the stop. The location pin was just open field. I told my dispatcher. He said that stretch of highway hadn't had a service station in 10 years. It burned down after a lightning strike.
I didn't sleep much that week. The voice began appearing more often. Never shouting, never distorted, just calm and direct, giving small instructions that didn't always make sense. Take the old ramp, slow to 40, look left. Once it said my name, quietly, like it was confirming I was still listening. I started recording my drives. Sometimes the voice showed up on playback, faint but real. Other times it was gone entirely, replaced with a hollow tone that vibrated through the cab. One night, the tone changed pitch, deeper, slower, almost like a heartbeat. Then the voice said, "Do not follow the lights." I looked up. Through the windshield, maybe a quarter mile ahead, there were two bright beams in the sky, too high for headlights, too low for stars. They pulsed white-blue, moving in perfect sync. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder. For a second, the road looked like glass, reflecting the beams above. I blinked, and they vanished. When I started driving again, the clock on my dash had skipped forward 23 minutes. The final time I heard the voice was last month, just before dawn near Lincoln. The road was empty. My radio was off. Still, through the quiet, I heard that same mechanical calm. "You've arrived." Then silence. I looked around, just flat farmland and the faint shape of a radio tower far in the distance. But when I checked the odometer, it read exactly the same number as my first route from the night of the accident, down to the 10th of a mile, like I'd never left that road. The truck's onboard log showed no route data for that entire week. Dispatch thought it was a system failure. Maybe it was. But every night since, when I drive past that stretch of highway, my CB crackles once like a breath drawn through static, and a faint voice says, "Keep right." Sometimes I answer back. If this story made you look twice at the empty road ahead, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. Would you keep listening to the voice or kill the radio forever?